welcome to our first steps to COVID secure events. I'm Sarah Threlfall from Brightspace Events, and I've done a couple of IOSH certifications, and I've also completed my NEBOSH, which is a huge occupational health and safety qualification. So I'm just waiting for the final results on that bit. I've passed the theory, it's just the practical test. So hopefully that will make me a fully qualified health and safety professional. But I've also, more importantly, I think, been consulting with my clients throughout the pandemic on COVID secure events. I mean, they were film sets. We didn't actually have any with audiences, but they were big. You know, they were getting towards 50 odd people on site. So there's been, you know, a real world experience there of how this stuff happens. But then I've been able to put all of the health and safety and the COVID knowledge and the research and the analysis that I've done, run it through this event manager brain and hopefully come up with something that's useful to everybody who's going to be doing it for the next few months, hopefully. I've got 10 top tips. They largely split down into 3 sections: planning, assessment, and then implementation. So I'm just going to walk through those one by one. So the very first thing we need to do is understand where our legal responsibilities are regarding this. I think it's very important to note that Boris Johnson has said he's going to remove the legal limits on social gatherings on the 21st of June. The legal limits on gatherings are the things like you can only have 30 people and you can't do more than 6 outside. And, you know, that's a legal limit on a gathering or social contact. The legal requirement we have to keep people safe and to do risk assessments is completely different to those restrictions. Okay, so we have a responsibility under the normal Health and Safety at Work Act, 1974, that's been around since, to keep people safe. So our employees and others who are affected by our work activity. So that's why we do normal risk assessments, because of that legal requirement. And under the management of health and safety at work regulations, you have to have a written risk assessment if there's more than 5 people in your business. Okay, so these are existing health and safety laws that apply absolutely for coronavirus. The HSE have classified it as a significant risk. But just to even more belt and braces that legal responsibility we have, there is a specific direction under the what's shorthand called the coronavirus regulations, which is the public health restrictions coronavirus. It's got a very long title, but Section 7 of the coronavirus restrictions says every gathering organizer must carry out a risk assessment. It also says they must take all reasonable measures to limit the risk of transmission and taking into account any guidance. Okay, so there's not a lot of black and white in health and safety or coronavirus legislation. It's all very grey and very interpretative. This is very black and white. So there's a very clear legal requirement for you to do this. If you don't, you're in breach, which means you could be fined, you could be prosecuted, or the HSE could enforce a prohibition notice, which would shut you down. So there's some serious legal consequences here. So all of this information hopefully helps with point 2, which is that this planning, this COVID assessment has to be led from the top of organisations. So this is a culture shift. We are historically quite a low risk industry unless we're doing some really drastic activities, but we're not a nuclear power plant or a chemical factory. However, we are now moving into an era where what we do is high risk from a health and safety perspective. So we need to be led from a health and safety side, and we need to be led from the top. You know, this could incur extra expense. There's going to need to be some good expectation management with your clients, with your staff, about what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And you might need additional resources in terms of people or space, or anything that you're going to need is going to be easier if you've got that leadership from the top, and people who can make those kind of decisions around budget and have those kind of conversations. So if you're worried that you don't feel your organization is being led from the top, then some of those arguments, hopefully, about the legal responsibilities you have will help. There's also some big financial implications potentially, not just fines, but your reputational impact should there, God forbid, be an outbreak at your event, or even if people just felt unsafe. If they come to your event and the feeling is they don't think that you've done enough and they're not happy, they'll all start talking about it. And there's the age-old stat that if you have a bad experience, you tell 10 people, but if you have a good experience, you only tell one. So, the reputational ripples of not taking this seriously could be really quite serious. And when it comes to people like venues, particularly, we're seeing it already, that people are losing business because the clients aren't happy that they've got the right kind of approach or that they've got the right sort of measures in place. So if we need to convince people around us and above us that this needs to come from the top, there's some very, very compelling arguments, I think. Not to mention that once it's being led from that kind of senior executive level, everyone else is much more likely to comply, and your culture shift will go sort of throughout your team or your organization. It doesn't need to just be organization. It could be your team leader, your event leader. The other thing we need to do is start from the beginning. It is going to be quite a frustrating experience for you, for your guests, for everybody, if you do a risk assessment 2 weeks before your event. If you do your risk assessment 2 weeks before your event, you are very limited in what you can do in terms of measures, and they become very restrictive because it's all about barriers and queues and perspex screens and masks and distancing, because you haven't left yourself any other options. If you can start this planning early on, then you can do some really clever stuff with design to change your risks inherently. So this, I like to sort of say, and I've stolen this from someone, and I'm so sorry because I don't know who said it first, but this is our opportunity as an industry to reinvent what we do rather than try and recreate what we used to do and just make it safe. You can start thinking about event design to change what you're doing and make it safer. So smaller groups, using rotations, shorter sessions, staggering everything is one of your measures, but staggering arrivals could also be a real benefit to target your content to specific groups. So it doesn't have to just be a real, oh God, we've got to do this. It's an exciting chance to think, right, how can we do this? Another good example is that, roving mics are a terrible idea in this situation for various reasons. But so you kind of then end up thinking, well, let's try and do apps, or can we do the app where we turn our phone into a microphone? And then if we're going to do that, well, how else can we use this app? What else can it do? Can we get polls? Can we get some pre-event engagement going? Can we get post-event engagement going? So something that was a safety measure, if you think about it early enough, will become an enhancement to your guest experience and to your event. So if you're focusing on objectives, I think that's also a really important part here. So if your objective is to reward people and that's why you're feeding them, then you may need to think a bit more creatively about how to reward them. Because a traditional dinner or lunch is slightly tricky with COVID precautions in place. So is there something else you can do that's the perk? Because the actual drawn out dinner with whatever is not necessarily going to work as well. But it might free up some budget. So you might sort of say, well, no, we're not going to keep them there for a lovely boozy lunch. But what we will do is have a half hour or a 20-minute, celebrity speaker, which we wouldn't normally do. But that's an extra draw instead of a lunch. So there's, chances to design this very sensitively around the measures so that we're weaving them into the whole event process instead of just sort of stamping them on right at the end. I mean, another reason for planning your COVID approach approach right from the word go is that your schedules and things, particularly for build, are going to be different. We're very good at building a event in a very short period of time, so lots of people swarming over the same space and area, all running different jobs at the same time, okay, which is brilliant from an efficiency process. It's not very good from a COVID process. So you might have your production team needing to work in close cohorts, so they have to be close together with their immediate workers. But if you do that, you have to distance them from the other teams. So that might mean that you need longer for your build, which means you might have to consider that for availability in venues and all of the relevant, knock-on effects there. It would be very difficult if you suddenly realised you need an extra day for your build and you've already contracted a venue that can't extend your hire. Or the only option you've got there is to sort of throw money at double crews and overnight and that sort of thing. So the more you do, the more efficient, the better your result, and the more kind of creative you can be with your measures. So do start to think about this stuff right from the beginning, and what you can do. Oh, and the other thing is, think about, as well as the word hybrid being used to say, an event where it's filmed and you've got an audience at home and an audience in person, the word hybrid also for me means a hybrid experience. So the experience for the guest doesn't just have to be focused on what happens in that room. Now we're used to having online content and gifts delivered and boxes arriving and things like that. Can you actually take some of your event experience and deliver it before the event or after the event, as well as the apps? Can you give them gifts and things when at home, or can you actually deliver some of the more basic content that's online to get rid of that, and then you can focus all of your in-person activity on the stuff that really needs to be in person? So there's some massive opportunities here for us to be really creative with what we're doing. What's going to be really important is that this is a collaborative approach with, and the best word I could come up with is stakeholders, because I kind of mean everybody that's involved in the event in the whole of that spider diagram. So we want senior management, event managers, doers. We need production companies, crew. We need to be talking to suppliers and venues and speakers and CEOs of the client. We really do need to involve everybody in a two-way conversation about how we're going to plan a COVID secure event. Lots of reasons, two main reasons. They're going to have better ideas. If we're focusing solely on our event objectives, what we want to achieve from the event, let's talk to the people who know how this stuff works to make sure that they have a chance to say, I could do this, why don't we think about that? So you're going to get much better ideas if you engage with your whole network instead of just trying to sort of COVID secure assess on your own. The second thing is, if people have been involved in that process and they feel that they're being listened to, you're going to massively improve your compliance rates when it comes to it. So if people think that this was their idea and they've been involved in these measures and this format, then they're going to be bought into that idea and they're going to be able to make it happen. And of course, it's a chance for them to say, I don't think that is going to work. And that's really important. Trust the people that are doing this stuff day to day. If they say, I really don't like, if the venue says, oh no, that corridor's not really going to work for that, then, it's a chance to then refine it and work on a solution that works for everybody's objectives. I think that historically there's been a little bit of a swapping of assessments between suppliers. Here's my risk assessment, there's my risk assessment, there's mine. But I think now we really do need to make them more bespoke and more collaborative to make sure that we're doing this safely. Because let's not forget, this is new for everybody. We're all learning. So it is going to take a lot more experiments and a lot more kind of knowledge sharing before we hit a place where everybody's confident with what needs to happen. So if we do that together, it's going to be a much more successful process. The next point is now we're deep into the actual assessment process. So we need to use the science that we've got, and we need to understand the hazard that we're dealing with. So, the classic know your enemy. It doesn't work as well, and it becomes clunky and doesn't really sort of fulfill the objective if you start with measures first. So if you just start by saying, well, we're going to make everyone wear a mask and keep distance and we're going to make them sanitize, that's fine, it might help, but you haven't actually looked at what the hazards and the risks are for your specific event. So it's really important that you understand the way coronavirus behaves, how it transmits, because ultimately that is what we're trying to stop. And you keep up to date with the latest science and news, because it takes generally a long time for updates in science to filter down and make their way into guidance. So you might have seen that recently with the airborne transmission. People in my network and on LinkedIn and in health and safety have been talking about airborne transmission for 6 months, and it's still struggling to make it into decent guidance. So this is a very quick slide which shows you the 3 different ways that transmission can occur, and it's very important that when you're assessing, you look at all 3 of these transmission routes and don't just focus on one of them. Basically, you can cough and splutter, which produce large droplets that contain infected particles, so they contain the virus. If those large droplets are inhaled by somebody else or sort of touched into their face, then that's a direct transmission person to person. If those droplets land on a surface and are picked up by somebody else's hands and then into their mouth, that's indirect transmission or surface transmission or contact transmission. The third one that I've mentioned is the coughing and spluttering, but also shouting, singing, and even just breathing releases very, very small particles. They're called aerosols, and they don't land, they don't sort of fly away. They're very unpredictable about how they behave because they're so small, but they do hang around in the air, I'm afraid, and therefore they build up in concentration. So this is a very simple but I think effective visual of what happens, over the course of an hour. That's an infected person producing lovely aerosols, and you can see that after an hour without ventilation, that's quite a serious issue there, because someone else can walk into that space even after that person's gone and inhale enough to become infected. So ventilation is going to be of absolute importance as we move out of hopefully, as we move out of masks and out of social distancing. The only thing we've then got left is ventilation. So it really needs to be a focus at the venue find stage. Ask questions about their ventilation. Another little visual to show the difference between what happens if you're silent and what happens if you're shouting or singing, of quantity of aerosol that you produce. So you do produce a lot more if you're shouting or singing. And if you think about the kind of volume in your average networking reception gets higher and higher, and that people are generally using a raised voice in that situation. So it's definitely worth knowing that. We need to then decide what measures we're going to put in place. Now, the good news is we have an awful lot of guidance from the government, from our industry, about how they want us to work. Guidance is different to legislation because it doesn't have to be voted on by Parliament, so it can be produced a lot faster. It can be produced quicker than legislation. And it's most of what is in the guidance is not legally binding. However, it does talk you through how you do comply with the legally binding bits. So, and because in this instance the guidance is specifically referenced in the legislation, it's very important that you are using the government guidance when it comes to planning. You can find it all in a a handy website, which is the Working Safely During Coronavirus section of the government website. So if you just searched working safely during coronavirus, it would bring up this page, and you basically will see that there's a large list. Hang on, see if this works. There's a large list of different industries that are covered and have guidance. Hopefully, most of you know this and have seen it. So this is where we'd find the guidance, and please note this does apply to England. There are different versions for Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and obviously if you're abroad it's important to find out what applies in your area. However, they're very good practical guidance about how to work, so it's a good best practice sort of standard to use wherever you are, if you ask me. So this is where you'd find the detail basically of what you can do and how they want you to work. We go into it in quite a lot of detail in the courses that I run, but for now I don't have time. So this is for you to just know where it is and make sure that you're aware, and also be aware of which bit applies to what you're doing. Because sometimes things are allowed under one guidance but aren't allowed under the other, which really does throw the cat among the pigeons. So as long as you're clear, I'm a heritage location and therefore I can do this, here's the guidance, good. If you just hope you can do it, that's going to be trickier. So excuse me. If you've got any questions about I'm this, I want to do X, can I? The best thing to do is give me a call, because there's so many grey Venn diagrams where different guidance affects different things. There's no easy answer. So I'm happy to talk through that sort of question if you've got them. Moving from the government guidance, they, in this website, specifically reference 3 pieces of industry guidance. Now, there's more than this out there, and I'll talk right at the end about where you can find that. But these are the 3 that are feeding into the government departments, they're feeding into the DCMS, and they're feeding into the All Parliamentary Events group. So the 3 different organisations are the MIA. Their guidance is generally focused on venues and event organisers in what I would say was a traditional meetings and conference style business. Okay. So normal just training, hotel-based conferences, and those kind of meetings, you'd go for the MIA guidance. The Association of Event Organisers, now they've created the All Secure standard, which you might see referenced. It's a really clear set of rules for people to follow. It is aimed more at exhibitions. It's not aimed more, it's aimed totally at exhibitions. But again, a lot of what they say is very relevant as best practice for any kind of event. So their guidance is good and strong. And also the Events Industry Forum, who are focused on outdoor events. So big, generally quite big festivals or concerts, or craft fairs, food festivals, those sorts of things. So quite often public events rather than B2B events, but still, again, very good best practice. Now, part of the course is that I've done a wrap up of these and pulled them into sort of a summary document. And there are a lot of repeating themes, as you'd imagine. That the virus hazard is the same, no matter whether you're in a field, in a conference room or an exhibition. So they do have a lot of repeating themes, which is reassuring, because you think, okay, these are the things that I need to focus on. Again, these are all updated sporadically. You can get on the email lists, but sometimes it hits junk. The Events Industry Forum is the one that's been most recently updated. And as soon as we get any other updates, again, it would be featured on our Facebook group, or if you join our mailing list, then we'll mail it out as well. So there's a few ways you can stay up to date on that. Very briefly, because people are doing filming, a lot of filming at the moment, there's 3 guidance documents for the film industry. I would, if I were you, focus on the APA guidance, because that is for commercial filming, which is really, I think, what we do. They've also got tons of other releases, as well as best practice guidance, they have a release about testing that's just come out. They've got releases about vaccination status and things like that. So the APA is a really good organisation to keep your eyes on, because I think they've ended up being market leading because it's filming and that's what's happening at the moment. Once you've got your hazards, once you've got your guidance and you think, right, I'm ready to sit down and go through this now, the final tip for your assessment really is just to be really methodical. The more kind of consistency that you can get in your approach, the better for everybody. We would recommend using a plan, do, check, act system, which is a standard sort of health and safety approach, to make sure that you're looking at the process as a whole and not just a form that needs to be filled in or a template that needs to be completed for, a risk assessment. So once you're happy that you've got your event, if you like, and it's finished and the big decisions have been made, as soon as you get to that point, start doing your assessment. Don't leave it to the end. I would strongly recommend that these are working documents. They start off full of red text or highlights or whatever you use to indicate a TBC. It's got deadlines and actions on it. It's got lots of, I need to find this out, find that out, ask them. And as you get closer to the event, that information then starts to solidify and turns into so-and-so to check on site. So-and-so will do this, so-and-so will do that. So make them a working document and then just work your way through. We're very good at that. We're event planners. We build a delegate journey in our heads right from the word go. That's what we do. So just do that, but do it with a hazard view in mind. Each time a guest does something or goes somewhere, analyze those 3 routes of transmission and then address the risk if there is one with a measure, preferably from the guidance notes. There is a big risk in events that's not transmission related, which is your isolation impact, because there's a very real chance that one of your key players will suddenly become unavailable. They woke up with a cough, or their kids woken up with a cough, or they've had a notification from Test and Trace that they need to isolate. So we need to make sure that we've reduced the risk of that happening if we can. Don't keep all your speakers together the day before the event. Make sure that they're kept separate. But we need a plan B in case it does happen. You'd much rather have a plan to kick into play rather than frantically scrambling around going, what are we going to do? And also make sure your suppliers are part of that assessment. Do you have any suppliers who are at risk of this, who maybe have just one person, or are they really specialist? Do you need a really specialist camera tech or something like that you'd find difficult to replace? Make sure you've spotted your weaknesses and then you can plan around them. So when it comes to implementation, communications are a massive part of your risk assessment. This is behavioural based, this risk, it's people based. So therefore, a lot of the measures that we put in place are behavioural measures. So we need to tell people the rules, we need to tell the crew how we want them to behave. But it's really important from a mental safety aspect as well. We want to, 2 reasons, reassure people that we're doing everything we can, and also just to tell people what to expect when they get there. So videos are great for this. If you can film the arrival process, as long as people know what to expect, then you can massively reduce any anxiety around that process. So that's really important. And generally, the rule is for COVID stuff is over communicate. We wouldn't normally, but we'd recommend publishing your risk assessment on your website, because and making it accessible. So send out like an easy 1-pager. This is welcome to the event. This is what's going to be expected. These are the rules. This is what we're doing. If you'd like to view the full risk assessment, click here. And definitely send it out to your crew, to your staff. Make sure that everybody's aware of what's going on behind the scenes and what their requirements are, what they are responsible for when they're on site. The final implementation point is about technology. There's a lot of solutions out there which are generally aimed at reducing contact with people or reducing the amount of time that you're somewhere, because the time is a big risk factor. Registration obviously is a top risk, and therefore a top spot to introduce scanners, face scanners. Can you do all your registration online, please, before people get there? QR codes, apps, websites. And you can do some distancing stuff with the little beacons that will flash or buzz if you're too close to somebody else. And also invest in some technology for your comms on site, for your team. We really want to avoid people kind of having to have those little huddled conversations that we have. So make sure everybody's got a radio, or there's a WhatsApp group, or whatever it is. Just make sure that you've had the discussion and everyone's aware of how they are expected to communicate when they're on site. So that's the end of the tips. And just quickly before we go into questions, these are the bits where you can sort of follow us and get all the updates. On our website, we've got a information hub where we publish all the other guidance that we find. The HSE website is really good for stuff as well. There's lots of information and practical guidance on there. So if you want to sign up to that, then you'll get updates. And like I said, we've just started this Facebook group. And the idea really is that it's not me talking to people. I want it to be a place where people can kind of chat and go, oh, my clients asked me this. Has anyone done that? What do you think about that? Are we allowed to do this? I'm a venue. Can I do that? So that's a good place, hopefully, to have these, back to live conversations. I am also going to do a plug. We do 2 training courses on this, which go into a lot more detail. They split into 2. We've got a full in-depth course that includes a live session with me, and that's for people who have a responsibility to actually write the risk assessments. But this is such a huge issue. We really think everybody needs to know at least a top line summary of what's going on. So in conjunction with the HBAA, we've designed a course for clients, for venues, for sales managers, for anyone who's a supplier who needs to know what's going on. So, and that one is online only. So you can do that at your own pace whenever you want. And both courses are constantly updated on the online platform. So even if you've trained 3 weeks ago, if the guidance changes, you will have access to updated modules that I film and release when we need to change the information. Excellent. Well, thank you for your time, everybody. And please do just drop me a line on LinkedIn or jump in on the Facebook group if you've got questions. And we'll get through this together. We'll all learn and share to move forward and get back to live. Thanks, everyone.